Hello and welcome to this, the first episode of my podcast. I'm Lou Raccoon and welcome to Trash Talk. So guys, really happy that you guys want to hear more from me. I would like to extend my eternal gratitude and my thanks to Anthony Ludwig, and apologies if I pronounce your name wrong, the Ryd Renegade, or the Ryd Renegade. You have both input great suggestions for my first episode, and I thought it would be a great introduction for today's podcast. So Anthony has suggested that I talk about my journey into the furry fandom and my educational background and how they've influenced each other, which I think I will start off with. And the Ryd Renegade, sorry, once again, has suggested that I talk about my fursonas, both Lou Raccoon, which you guys know me quite well for at this stage, unless you're new here, in which case, hello, I'm Lou Raccoon, and Mochni, which was my sona before Lou. And of course, if I'm going to be talking about my introduction into the furry fandom, I feel like talking about Mochni and talking about Lou is also going to be quite a nice segue. So I'm going to start off by apologizing. This is my first podcast, so if you guys have any feedback for me, if anything doesn't go so well, or if you have any notes on today's episode, please do give me some feedback in the comments and replies. Your feedback's very important to me, and I want to take it on board, and I want to improve and make these as enjoyable for you to listen to as they are for me to make. So once again, just comment in the replies if you have any notes, and I will gladly read every single thing that you guys write, as you know I always do. So I joined the furry fandom at the ripe old age of 12 years old. I was very young. The furry fandom was something I had not heard about, but I was obsessed growing up with wolves, with animals. I was always very focused on nature. I grew up wanting to be a vet. I grew up always drawing. I was obsessed with dogs. I was obsessed with dinosaurs. I was obsessed with dragons. All of them very pivotal in my progression into the fandom. So when I was about 12 years old, I was online, which is a dangerous place for a 12-year-old to be. And I was on, I believe it was Kick or something of the sort. It was like an online chat room kind of thing. And I remember talking to this guy on there who messaged me out of nowhere, and we were talking, and I told him that I like drawing, and he was significantly older than me, which in itself was a red flag, but we're not going to touch on that today. But he suggested this furry game called Furcadia. And Furcadia was a massive catalyst in my introduction into the fandom. If you don't know, Furcadia is an online RPG and chat room in which you can mingle with people who have these cute little 8-bit furry avatars. You can customize them pretty thoroughly, I'd say. So I had a lot of fun on the customization screen, making my little wolf character. And in this game were these little, like, I guess they're little home hubs, I suppose. You could make your own little worlds in Furcadia that were called dreams. And I remember taking my character, which I named Zeban. I don't know if you can class that my first fursona, but like I took Zeban into a few dreams, but my favorite ones that I remember were the Dog Adoption Center, the Dog Pound, and Wolf's Moon Heaven. These 3 dreams I obsessed over because they transformed my avatar into a feral quadruped wolf character, and I absolutely loved it. And I would spend pretty much every waking hour that I wasn't in school playing this game as a quadruped wolf avatar. I loved this game, and I was just like, I remember once my brother tried to get me to turn the computer off, and I was so adamant that I wanted to carry on playing the game that I'm pretty sure we got into a bit of a fisticuff over the fact I wouldn't let him use the PC. But what siblings haven't gotten into fisticuffs, am I right? Anyway, so Furcadia was my first real introduction. It was on there that I learnt what furries were, and it was on there that I learnt about fursonas. And then as I progressed and got older, I still played Furcadia for a very long time. I think I played that game for several years, and I'm pretty sure Furcadia is still up and running today because I have played it recently, just to touch my toes back in for nostalgia's sake. So if you're ever curious, go and check out the Furcadia website. I will leave a note in the description of a link to the website for that. It would be good if we could bring it back, but I think it's of a bygone era at this stage. After Furcadia, I learned what furries were. I designed Bracken, and Bracken was my fursona when I was in Exeter College, which isn't university for all the Americans listening. It's kind of like between the ages of 16 to 18, I suppose, 15 to 18, and it is an extension on school that's completely optional. You don't have to do it. It's just, if you want to go, you can apply to it. So I'm not 100% sure on the school system in the States, but between the ages of 15 to 18, you can elect to go to additional learning, which for me was Exeter College. And Bracken was my fursona there. Fennec Fox Siamese cat hybrid with red hair. And I used to start going to furry meets and catching the train in to go to those. I didn't actually go to my first furry convention until post-university in 2018. So I was in my 20s at that stage when I went to my first furry convention. And my first furry convention was Confuzzled, which is one of the, I would say, the biggest furry convention in the UK. So the introduction into that was just like, it was mind-blowing. Going from my little county where I'm at, where furries, we exist, but we're few and far between. It's pretty derelict here. There's barely anyone around. And yet you go from the arse end of nowhere to a place like Birmingham to go to a furry convention in Birmingham, and there are hundreds of attendees, hundreds of people in fursuit. And I went and I stayed with my good friend Frith. I hadn't actually met them until I rocked up at the hotel. So Frith, I was chatting to a friend of Frith's who said that Frith was looking for someone to share a hotel room with, and they thought that we would get along quite well. So I got in touch with Frith, and Frith was very sweet and arranged the whole thing for me. And I just sent the money because I was really intimidated by the process. And we got a shared room at the hotel itself, which was great. And going to the furry convention with no prior experience, it was just ridiculous how I walked through those double doors, and it was just, the weekend hadn't even started, and yet there were so many people in fursuit. I had never seen so many fursuits in my life, and I was in awe. I couldn't believe it. And we went and we checked in and we went up to our rooms, and I had to take 5 minutes to just ground myself, because I was just like, there is so much here. My little mind cannot comprehend what I am looking at. This is ridiculous. Frith was very understanding, bless them. I love Frith to bits. If you're listening, Frith, hi. But yeah, that whole weekend was phenomenal. Everyone was so sweet, so supportive. I met some great people. The dealer's den, that was great too. And I remember going to one of the raves, and that was a blast. I remember going in the pool and playing around with some new people that I met there, and it was all so good. And I kind of went away thinking, oh, I want to do this more often. This is great. But I have not been to a proper furry convention since then. I've been to Furcation, and that was significantly less impressive. I could go into that on another day if you want to hear about my Furcation experience. But I decided for a while that I wasn't going to go to smaller conventions because of my experience at Furcation. But I would 10 out of 10 go to Confuzzled again. I would also travel to the States, and I would travel to Eurofurence as well, because big furry conventions, there's something magical about them. They're just like a whole other experience. There was this brief period while I was at university that I left the fandom. That was between Bracken and Mochni. So I left the fandom as Bracken, and I designed Mochni while I was out of the fandom. And unfortunately, the reasoning behind that was my partner at the time didn't like the fandom, and because of how he felt, I dropped out. I basically was like, okay, well, I will still draw. If people commission me, I will still draw, but I am not actively part of the fandom. So I pieced out for a bit while I was with him, and I really regret that, because I know now that it was more ignorance and failure to put the effort in to learn and be open-minded about the whole fandom on his end. And when I rejoined the fandom, it was like I was reconnecting with a part of myself that I lost while I was in that relationship. The fandom has helped me out of many a tight spot. For one example, I had a situation at the end of university where my housemate, it was just me and my good friend who was a normie, but he got a job offer in Ireland and left the house early to go there. And as I was leaving the house, my grandma sadly passed away, so I had to move out early. But as I was coming out of that contract, I had an unexpected fee to pay that was just like a penalty for that. So I got hit with this fee for a couple of £100, which I didn't have because I was a university student. I called the office saying, is there any way that I could pay this in installments, because I am a student, I can't afford this. And I remember flat out that the woman on the line just said, pay it or we will come and we will repossess your property to make up the cost. So I spiraled into a panic. I only had 3 days to pay this fee. When I was on Twitter, I was still fairly new to Twitter, and this was when I was Mochni. I hopped on Twitter and put a shout out for help, basically saying I will do emergency commissions, £15 each. I'm going to be getting them all done over the course of the next few days. I need to basically pay this bill. And I had such an outpour of support that I actually made that deadline and made that couple of hundred up overnight. So I could close commissions. I pulled an all-nighter. I spent all night drawing, and I met that bill and I was able to pay it off. So I've never known such a supportive community. In relation to my education, so I come from an artistic background. As I said at the start, I have always been drawing and always been drawing animals. I have always loved animals, so it was very easy for me to pick up a pencil and start drawing wolves. My first exposure to that kind of content was, I remember getting Balto 2 Wolf Quest on video from the local supermarket, and I binge watched that to heck. And I just remember repeatedly, over and over again, I was drawing the main character Elu, the Balto's daughter, who is not even half wolf, but I was obsessed with her. I don't know if I wanted to be her or what, but I just kept drawing on her. I was hyperfixating on her so much that I just couldn't stop drawing her. And then that progressed to animes like Wolf's Rain. Forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, but Genga Densetsu Weed. So those, I started drawing in that style, had a more anime look to it, was obsessed with anything wolf or dog. And yeah, of course, Disney as well. I was just drawing Disney characters a lot too. I remember trying to draw Tramp from Lady and the Tramp a lot. And I remember even before I knew what furries were, that I was like drawing myself as a dog as well. So it kind of stemmed from there. But I actually started off drawing dinosaurs. That's like my first hyperfixation was dinosaurs growing up. And I remember having an imaginary friend, which we will say is the toddler equivalent of having an OC. And she was called Sarah the Dinosaur. And because I was probably on the autism spectrum, I knew all the dinosaur names back then. And I had an imaginary friend who was a Coelophysis. And yeah, I just used to draw lots of illustrated storybooks about Sarah the Dinosaur's adventures. And yeah, like when I got accepted to do animation at Exeter College, that was so exciting for me. I've always been obsessed with cartoons and coming up with stories and things like that. So when I got accepted for animation at Exeter College, I was ecstatic. And one thing that I did kind of get taken up on was the fact that I only seemed to animate animals. And when I went to Falmouth Uni and I applied for animation at Falmouth University, they actually, I had a showreel to give them, which was great because I think that strongly worked in my favour, because they even said in the listing for the course, look, you don't have to have any experience in animation to apply for this course. And here I was coming to the Falmouth University interview, not only with an A-level in animation, well, it was an A-level in interactive media, but that's just fancy talk for animation, and a showreel that I can give them. And I remember coming to the interview, and the lecturer that was interviewing me, he looked at my showreel and he had a complete poker face, and I was terrified of him. And he was just like, what would you say if we told you you couldn't animate animals? And I was just straight up honest. I said to him, I would find it a challenge, but I would definitely give it my best shot, which must have been the right answer because I got into the course. Now that I have more experience behind me in the art world, I can draw people and I have animated people. So I'm not just typecast to furry artist. I can digress if need be, should the mood hit me. But I just have so much fun drawing anthropomorphic animals that, like, I'm only going to really dabble in humans here and there, and if I get paid to do it, you know. But yeah, I ended up taking my animation degree and getting through that and graduating with a degree with honours, a bachelor's degree with honours from Falmouth University with my animation degree. And yeah, that I feel like if you have a background in animation or you have an interest in animation, that really links quite hard into the furry fandom, because if you look at the history of the fandom, you can find documentaries on it on YouTube. There's some fascinating documentary. I think if you just look up the fandom on YouTube, there's a really cool documentary about furries on there. And it goes back to the 80s when the first furry conventions were starting. But a lot of the fandom is just born out of love for cartoon animals. And that's literally what it is the love of cartoon animals. So having as big an interest in animation as I do, it almost felt like the furry fandom was made for me. Not to sound egotistical or anything, but like if you love animation, you're probably going to love the furry fandom, you know? So that is how my art background blends into my connection to the furry fandom. As for my fursonas, so Bracken was my first one. It's quite difficult for me to go into, not because it's emotionally hard, but because there's many layers to it. So my fursona has appeared to change every time I feel like I have grown as a person. So Bracken was, I would say, my first identifiable fursona where I was like, yes, this is Bracken. She is my fursona. Bracken started off as a she because that was how I identified. My pronouns were she, her back then. And Bracken was just a way for me to self-insert. I was always doodling her, and I loved fennec foxes, so she was a fennec fox. But yeah, so Bracken was my first real proper fursona. So the artwork I have of Bracken, if you go back and you were to look at my old artwork of her, it's very childlike, very bubbly, very hyperactive and loud and excitable. That was kind of her personality. And that was very much what I was like at the time when I made her, when I was about 16. So Bracken was an extension of that. And I really had an attachment to her, and I drew her on everything. And like when I drew my normie friends as furries, I would draw them interacting with Bracken. That was just how it was. And I would draw her feral, and I would draw her more humanoid. Not very good back then, but I would give it a crack. And then when I left the fandom due to my not very supportive partner that I briefly mentioned before, that just kind of dropped off. And I went to university, and while I was at university, when the relationship didn't work out, I decided I was going to have an overhaul. And at the time, my grandma, who was very dear to me, was in her 90s and she wasn't doing very well. We had to put her into a home. She had gifted me this tiny ornamental blue tit because she could no longer live at her house. She was giving away her possessions, and she gave me this little blue tit. And at the time, I just thought, oh, it's a sweet little gesture. It's fine. And then something kind of hit me while I was like sat there, just like daydreaming, that this little bird, blue tits, they seem to have just appeared at pivotal points in my life. So my bedroom growing up, when me and my parents moved house before I went to college, like Exeter College, not University College, I had blue tit wallpaper in my room. And wherever I seemed to go, I would see blue tits, and I got gifted this blue tit ornament from my grandma. So just playing around, I was like, you know what? I haven't seen anyone with a blue tit fursona before. So I was just playing around. I was just having a doodle, and I came up with this blue tit character. And I recently as well just bought a DeviantArt account. I paid for a DeviantArt account that had the username Mochni. So I was just like, well, I have this DeviantArt username Mochni, and I have this blue tit character that I've just drawn up. I might as well just call this blue tit character Mochni. And that's how my second proper fursona was made. So Mochni, I actually did some Googling after I set up the character just to see if there was anything relating to the name that I had to know about. And it's a shame because Google doesn't go into more depth about it, but Mochni is in a Native American language, and by definition it means talking bird, which I thought was quite cool that I had like made a fursona based off of a blue tit, happened to call them Mochni, and Mochni means talking bird in Native American. It's unfortunate that it doesn't elaborate on which Native American dialect. That would have been really useful because it's not as black and white as that, but that was the information I was given. And if anybody is privy to that knowledge, please let me know, because I would like to credit the proper vocabulary, the proper dialect that word came from, if people were to ask me about it in the future. So I had Mochni. I remember someone making a comment about her being a queen or something, and she developed into Queen Mochni. The great thing about Mochni is I have always struggled with my self-esteem. But when Mochni was crowned queen and everyone treated her as such, it kind of awakened something in me. Like, I wouldn't say egotistical, but I definitely got some confidence and some dramatic flair from having Mochni titled as a queen. I treated myself like a queen vicariously. And that was unheard of in my previous experience. Like I haven't been the kindest to myself. I'm sure a lot of us are quite guilty of being cruel to ourselves, which is really sad. But when Mochni was given that title, I became Queen Mochni. It was incredible just how much I came out of my shell when I started to evolve this character and interact with people online and start to grow my audience. So when Queen Mochni was crowned and I went to Confuzzled and I was having people approach me being like, oh my God, I had someone approach me while I was in the lobby and they came up to me and they were just like, oh, I'm really nervous. I've really wanted to meet you. And that just like surprised me. But at the same time, I was just like, well, I am the queen. But I still have a very strong attachment to Mochni. She's definitely one of a kind and definitely a character that I don't see myself ever parting with. The funny story, before she became a blue tit, she was actually, I was actually toying with the idea and did portray myself as a griffin online, like a zombie griffin. And someone who's been following me on Twitter for that long will probably remember Mochni version 1, which was going to be just this zombie griffin. But I am glad that she actually became this like regal blue tit character. That felt so much more fitting. And I mean, the Undead Griffin is a separate journey in of itself. The Undead Griffin was part of a story I was developing, so that's fine. That character's not dead, it's just on the shelf, or it is dead, it's a zombie. But you get what I mean. Progressing into Lou. So the pandemic hit us, as we all know, in 2020, and I was still Mochni when the pandemic hit. And I survived the pandemic, as everyone who is able to listen to this podcast also did. And it's left a scar on everyone, this pandemic. And I remember going to my first event after the pandemic hit, and it was a music festival, and it was just, I remember almost breaking down in tears of joy because of how good it was to be around people again after so long of not being able to mingle with people. And I had a blast. I went to Bloodstock, and that was the first festival after the pandemic. It was cancelled for a very long time, so it was really good to be able to get there and shake the dust off following COVID, and met some wonderful people there too. And when I came back, I kind of noticed that although Mochni has helped me through a lot and helped me find myself, that I was changing as a person post-university. I was becoming myself. I was coming more into myself. And I came to the realization that although I loved Mochni, she didn't really feel like she was me anymore. So I'm with my partner now. My partner's very sweet, and I was just jokingly saying something along the lines of, I don't know, what kind of animal do you kind of associate with me? Because I feel like I need to draw myself out a new character. And he just turned around and he was like, oh, probably sound like a raccoon because you got those like tiny grabby hands, which thank you for that. So just for the heck of it, I drew myself as a raccoon, and I loved it. I saw this design I made and I was like, my God, it's like I connect with it. My body type, my kind of mannerisms, this like mischievous glint in its eyes. What an absolute gremlin. I relate to this character on a spiritual level. So Lou Raccoon was born, and I couldn't decide on a name for Lou for a little while. I was thinking of something space themed like Nebula or something like that. But as I was thinking about it, I thought of basically Lou was what I used to get called when I was a toddler, when I was a kid, by my mum and dad. Like they would call me Lou. They would call me into the room. They would be like, oh, come on, Lou. And like, for some reason, while I was looking at this raccoon character, I was just like, I think I want to call her Lou. I think that's a connection I want to form again. And after I called her Lou, I decided to go by Lou in my waking life too. So I made that decision, and my mum has been very supportive of it, and my friends have been very supportive of it. And it's been like, for my mum, it's not been that drastic a change because she used to call me Lou anyway. So it's part of my middle name. So my middle name is Louise. So it doesn't come from nowhere. And my mum used to call me it when I was growing up anyway. So it wasn't that much of a segue for her. But things like my boyfriend and his family, like they've gotten used to calling me by my legal name. So it was quite a transition for everyone else. But everyone who has been calling me Lou has been very, very good and very, very consistent with it. And I commend them because I know that like that can't be easy. But Lou is an aspect of my identity. I feel like with Queen Mochni, she was helping me to grow. And Lou is the character I have grown into. So Lou is a representation of me coming to terms with myself, me finding comfort in the way I am as I am, whereas Queen Mochni was a means of me to grow my confidence and to put myself out there. And Lou is content with being out there, and Lou is doesn't need a queen title, doesn't need to overcompensate with flash and bang. Like, Lou is just Lou, you know? And that's why I changed my fursona again. And I mean, I will never say never, but I don't see myself changing my fursona again. I feel like Lou is me and very much me, and I don't know how I can progress from here. But I remember thinking that with Mochni when I first made her, you know? So it's quite funny to look back now, especially at Mochni, and look at my current fursona and just see the difference between them and the similarities, because of course there's similarities there as well. And I don't know, it's been a wild ride, really. And I haven't really had any in-person interactions with the furry fandom since the pandemic. So it would be quite good if, now that I have discovered myself and I'm comfortable in my own skin, if I can get myself out there again. I'm really hoping to get myself involved with getting myself on the dealer's den, starting selling merchandise at conventions, and getting my face out there online as well, or a fursuit face maybe. So that would be good too. I really want to just live my life, you know, and having Lou as my visage, as my face, is liberating for me. Lou is a version of me that I am happy to present to the world, and she is me, and I take great comfort in that. I really do. Anyway, this will be the first episode of my new podcast, Trash Talk. I hope that this was eye-opening to you. I'm hoping to do more of these again in future. My good friend Amy, I've known her since I was 6 years old, so she has been with me and been in my life. She isn't a furry herself, but she has seen my transition into the fandom firsthand, and she has some stories of she just has some stories. She sent me, like, I suggested that she be a guest on one of these episodes, and she's more than happy to be a guest, but she's already started formulating lists of what she would like to talk about, and seeing that list is making me sweat a bit, because there's some pretty chaotic stuff on there from like our youth and growing up. So I'm genuinely really hoping that that will be a fun podcast for you all to listen to while I'm just hiding my face away from the microphone, because I know I'm just going to be cringing internally. Like, we were all cringe, but we were all free at that age. So unashamedly being a bit of a twat. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys if you are still listening to the podcast now. Thank you so much for sticking around for the entirety. Like, I am so blessed to have such a supportive group of people following my work, and all of you on Patreon have been able to make this possible. And I absolutely love creating content. It's one of my favorite things to do, is just making stuff for you guys to enjoy. So by all means, spread the word. Let people know that this is occurring, because I would like to have more people added to the family. And of course, if you are on my Patreon and you're not part of my Discord yet, I always extend a hand and offer my Discord server to anybody who joins my Patreon, but I know that a few people have opted out of that. But by all means, if you change your mind at any point and you would like to join my Discord server, please just send me a message on my socials and I will get you an invite link post haste. We're all very friendly people, and the Patreon only channel is absolutely hysterical and chaotic and just an absolute laugh. You really you're missing out. Anyway, take it easy, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Not quite sure how to sign these out yet, but we'll figure out a proper intro and outro when we get there. Take it easy, guys. Have a good week. Bye.